She slipped into the back seat, clutching a glass jar like the night wanted to tear it away. Her palms locked tight, shoulders curled in, eyes glued to the curve of glass. The door closed without a sound. Rain tapped overhead. Wipers groaned. The meter ticked, and the cab eased forward. Her address came out low, clipped, like she already regretted saying it. Somewhere south in Manhattan. She leaned toward the window, but never eased her grip. In the rear view, I caught her face, dark hair damp at the edges, skin drawn tight, eyes only for the jar. Neon bent across it as we passed bodegas and diners, every sign twisting inside until the glass looked alive. She didn't blink. Fragile? I asked. Her eyes flicked up, quick, then down again. Don't break hard. Voice flat, practiced, no hint of a joke. I drove careful. Tires hissed across soaked pavement. Steam rose out of grates. Lights smeared in the drizzle. A truck splashed water onto the windshield, and I hit the wipers too fast. Reflex, she gasped, the jar tilting just enough for a flicker to move inside. She steadied it, whispering something I couldn't catch. I muttered an apology. She didn't look up. The ride stretched quiet, her breathing measured, shallow. My own hands tightened on the wheel, echoing hers. Every block she sat like stone, lips pressed thin, as if even a blink could upset the balance. When I rolled through a yellow light smooth, she let out the first real breath I'd heard from her. I'd seen passengers cling to cats in shoeboxes, envelopes of cash, even soggy photo albums. People hold what matters. But this jar was empty, far as I could tell. And still, it rode heavier. Times Square was half dead in the rain, billboards flashing to no one. The colors bled into puddles, bounced into her glass, then onto her skin, shifting her face with each light. Tired, haunted, blank. The glass rewrote her over and over. She never looked up. Her lips moved soundless, maybe counting blocks, maybe breaths. By 42nd, a horn ripped through the rain and I hit the brakes too hard. The jar jumped an inch. She gasped, clutching it to her chest like it had lungs. You all right? I asked. One nod, eyes fixed on the glass. Just don't let it shake. The silence after told me this ride wasn't about miles. It was about holding something the city could never lay hands on. The bridge rose ahead, steel ribs dripping with rain, cables humming against the wind. She held the jar close, jaw set, counting under her breath as the tires thumped over each seam. Not numbers climbing or falling, just steady, like marking heartbeats. My own grip matched hers, hands locked on the wheel as if the cab itself might come apart. Halfway across, I asked quiet, You do that the whole ride? Her eyes met mine in the mirror. Helps. Then back to the jar. Traffic was thin, skyline shrinking behind us, bent and warped in the glass she guarded. Brooklyn stretched out ahead, streets darker, lamps spread wide, patches of light swimming on wet pavement. The jar caught every reflection and threw it back crooked, like hiding something behind the glow. At a stop sign, the question slipped out. What happens if it breaks? She lifted her head then, sharp, almost angry. It can't. One breath later, softer. It just can't. I nodded, let it drop. But the words sat heavy. A fragile thing that can't break. What did that even mean? She pressed the glass close again, whispering, still whole. The rain thinned to mist. I rolled my window an inch, let in the smell of iron and river water. She didn't notice. The jar filled her world. Her reflection doubled in its curve until it looked like two faces weren't enough to hold her. Factories loomed along Flushing, rust bleeding down their bones, neon signs sputtering half dead. The jar bent each flicker into sparks, glowing like it carried its own fire. She breathed against the lid, lips moving as if it might answer. I stared too long, drifted left, caught a pothole. Glass rang against her rings, clean, sharp. My gut clenched like I'd held it myself. Sorry, I muttered, useless. She pressed her forehead to the jar, listening to something I couldn't hear. Finally, she spoke. It's empty, but if it breaks, it won't be. The line froze me. Empty, yet not. A paradox riding in my back seat, heavier than any trunk load. We passed under a bridge ramp, headlights swallowed. In the dark pocket, the jar shimmered faintly, as though the night inside was breathing. When the light returned, her eyes were closed, but her grip stayed locked. Same weight, same rhythm, and I drove smoother than I ever had, afraid of a silence cracking louder than glass. Fog clung low as we slid past the Navy Yard, street lamps blurring into halos, ships half swallowed by mist. The air smelled of diesel and wet salt, sharp in the throat. She tapped her nail against the jar in time with her breath. Tap, inhale, tap, exhale, like proof it was still whole. You ever carried something you couldn't drop? She asked, voice rough, almost breaking. I kept my eyes on the road. Yeah. She waited, so I added, not glass. But yeah. Her mouth twitched. Could have been a smile, could have been pain. Then you know. And I did. I'd carried things before, radio batteries, folded maps, scraps of intel that weighed nothing but could crush if they slipped. You didn't explain it. You just held on. The cab became an echo chamber for that weight. Every turn, every seam in the asphalt, I smoothed out like the jar was mine to guard. She didn't thank me. Didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. A group of kids huddled under an awning as we passed. One hurled a bottle into the gutter. The shatter rang too loud, glass exploding against wet stone. She jerked, arms tightening, whispering numbers or prayers. Her eyes flicked wide, reflecting shards that weren't there, until the corners slipped behind us. I stayed quiet, let her find her breath. Her directions came sharp now. Next right, 2 blocks. Left. Like she'd memorized a path carved only for this jar. The smell shifted too, wet stone giving way to something chemical in the rain. A shutter banged loose on a warehouse wall, hollow echo chasing us down the block. She pressed the jar closer, as if the sound might reach in. You sure about this? I asked, voice slower than usual. Yes. Flat, no crack. The road narrowed, lined with chain-link fences sagging under years. A lone floodlight flickered, casting bursts across the glass until it seemed to glow from within. She stared at it, lips parting, then closed again, silent. At the next corner she pointed. There. The street we turned onto felt abandoned. Windows dark, bricks streaked with water stains. A single street lamp buzzing at the far end. Its glow bent across her jar, amber and dull, but she exhaled like it mattered more than anything we'd passed. You live here? I asked. She shook her head, eyes never leaving the glass. Not anymore. The way she said it told me plain, this street wasn't home. It was an ending. The block felt emptied out, every window black, only the hum of my engine holding the night together. She whispered quick numbers to the jar, then told me, stop here. We'd pulled up in front of a warehouse half dead. Cracked brick, boards nailed across one window, another left wide open to the drizzle. A faint buzz of electricity leaked from inside, but no light, no sign of life. Just walls breathing damp and rust. I let the cab idle. You need me to wait? She lifted her head for the first time. Met my eyes in the mirror. Not thanks, not relief, just recognition that I was there at all. No, you drove careful. Her door opened slow, rain dripping off the frame. She slid out, jar cradled tight, moving like one wrong step could shatter more than glass. I watched her cross the sidewalk, both hands locked, shoulders bent but steady. She reached the metal door, pushed it open. It groaned, then thudded shut behind her, dull as a stone dropped in water. And that was it. Fog drifted through my headlights. wrapping the brick like smoke that didn't rise. The seat behind me was damp where her coat had pressed, a faint circle darkening the vinyl. My hands still gripped the wheel the way hers had clung to that jar. The tension wouldn't let go. I thought about stepping out, just to check if she'd made it in. But I didn't. You learn not to follow. Curiosity's a line that gets you cut. The warehouse stayed silent. No flicker of light, no second glance. Just the echo of her last words. You drove careful. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd been driving for her, not the city. Every turn feathered, every seam softened. A figure crossed the far corner, hood up, moving fast through the fog. Too small, too quick. Not her. They vanished into an alley. The street stayed dead. No cars, no voices. Just drizzle settling on metal and the faint chemical tang bleeding from the block. I cracked my window, let the smell sting the back of my throat. The cab felt heavier empty than it had full. She'd taken nothing with her but a jar of air, and still it left me carrying more than I'd planned. I let the meter run a beat longer, then clicked it off. My thumb tapped the wheel, habit more than thought. The vinyl was slick, worn thin where hands like mine had gripped too long. Her seat was empty, just damp from her coat, yet I kept glancing back like the jar might still be there. Funny how absence can sit heavier than presence. The wipers scraped once, shrill against the glass. I leaned back, rolled my shoulders, but the tension held. Her words circled. You drove careful. Thanks, or just fact. It stuck either way. At the corner, a street lamp flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Its glow bent in the drizzle, warped across the windshield. For a heartbeat, it looked like the jar again, alive with light. My hands eased, like I was about to drop something fragile. I pressed the gas. The block opened to wider roads. Noise, headlights, the city's heartbeat sliding back in. A bus groaned past. A siren wailed far off. Laughter spilled out of a bar 2 streets away. Normal sounds, but muted, like the jar had carried off part of the night when she disappeared inside that warehouse. I cut across Atlantic, rain thinning to mist, skyline stretching blurred and bent in droplets on the glass. It reminded me of how the city had twisted inside her jar, each tower warped into something unrecognizable. By the time I pulled up on Flatbush, I let the engine idle. Rain tapped soft on the roof. My hands locked stiff on the wheel like I still held glass. The back seat smelled faintly of wet wool, nothing more. No trace of her, just the echo of her grip burned into mine. Outside, a couple ducked under one umbrella, laughing thin through the drizzle. A bus sighed at the corner, brakes wheezing. The city rolled on, but in my rear view, that warehouse stayed black and silent, holding her in the jar. The meter was dead. Diesel and wet stone hung in the air. I fired the engine, rolled back into the hum. Another fare waiting. Not glass this time, paper. A torn scrap clenched in a man's fist, his voice sharp. I'd gone the wrong way. That one's still circling in my head. Next ride, I'll tell it. If you're still riding with me, hit subscribe and keep the lights on.